Yes. Yep.
Okay, so I'll begin speaking. Welcome, everybody. Good evening. This is Richard Murley, along with Samantha Morley, our managing editor at October Hill Magazine, and we'd like to welcome you to an evening with October Hill Magazine, our very first presentation this year, in which we're going to have 7 presentations of 7 new works, different works by authors. 2 of the works will be read by staff members. So I'd like to also introduce members of our staff this evening. Samantha Morley, our managing editor. Selin Tekgurler, who is our short story editor. Heather Dunlop, who is our fundraising manager. Juliana Borkston, assistant poetry editor and book reviewer. Julia Romero, who is a book reviewer and proofreader for October Hill. Victoria Lynn, who is our social media coordinator. Have I left anyone out?
I don't believe so. I think that about covers it.
I think that about covers it.
No.
And I'm Richard Murley, in case I failed to introduce myself earlier. So we'd like to begin the evening with a new work by Mr. Robert Best. Robert is the author of 5 books on real estate investment and an unpublished manuscript of his decade living and working in Asia. He's had a total of 19 poems published to date and has a collection coming out in 2021 from Iron Press. He lives in Northumberland with Molly the Labrador in Northern England. So welcome this evening, Robert. You'll read a short story entitled 3 Occasions When Dad Saved My Life. We're looking forward to hearing it. Welcome to the evening, Robert, and thank you for kicking off this event for us.
Oh, thank you very much, Richard. It's an honour to be here and to start the proceedings. I appreciate it.
Pleasure to have you aboard.
Yes, especially since it's 1 o'clock in the morning here. So set me alarm.
Well, yeah, thank you very much for joining us at this late hour in the UK. I believe we have a total of 3 writers and editors. Trevor Maynard, who is a poet, along with Dominic Windram, who is also a poet, are also joining us from the UK this evening. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for keeping the midnight oil burning and joining us on this program.
No problem. It's a pleasure. Okay, well, look, this piece started life as a long poem, and it wasn't until I sent it to October Hill, the lovely people that work for you, Richard, suggested that it actually might work better as a short story, and wondered if I was interested in recrafting it. I've never done something like that before. I've written short stories and I've written poems, but I've never changed one into the other. So I embraced the challenge, and I think they were right. So yeah, so here it is. 3 occasions when Dad saved my life. When I was a boy, Dad used to take me to watch the scrambling. Scrambles are motorcycle races, dirt bikes with knobbly tyres racing around a muddy field, the track marked out with thick Hessian ropes strung between wooden stakes that had been hammered into the earth that very morning. Looking back at these events, which were, in essence, motocross for amateurs, through the lens of 21st century health and safety culture, they look like pure madness. The only nod to safety, apart from the flimsy stick and rope barriers, were the signs dotted around the field stating, "Motorsport is dangerous," and making it clear that we were all there at our own risk. We could stand wherever we liked, as long as we were on the spectator side of the ropes. Some even brought picnics, complete with a basket of food and a rug to sit on. On one cold, damp Saturday afternoon, we were standing on the outside of a right-hand bend near a hawthorn tree. Dad was taking photographs with his Minolta SLR of the bike and sidecar combinations careering towards us, then flashing past us, trailing peacock tails of dirt and stones in their wake. We always marvelled at the passenger in particular, whose job it was to position his weight in the best place to get the combination around the next bend, while keeping as many of the three wheels as possible in contact with the earth. On a right-hander, that involved him lying across the back of the bike, behind the rider, and on a left-hander, he had to hang off as far as he could off the outside edge of the sidecar, which was little more than a steel platform with grab handles, to stop the third wheel from rising into the air and flipping the whole thing over. Mid-race, through the blue haze of burnt two-stroke oil, over the roaring din of engines and through the excitement and testosterone, Dad suddenly yelled, "Let's move." We'd walked no more than 5 paces up the hill when one of the riders suddenly lost control on the bend, crashing straight through the barrier, snapping 2 of the posts like matchsticks and running over the rope, all before running over the very spot where we'd been standing just a few seconds before. The rider kept it on its wheels and simply headed for the next section of barrier, where a helpful spectator lifted the rope for them so they could duck under and get back into the race. Dad just looked at me and raised one eyebrow in his "told you so" manner and carried on taking pictures. I was so caught up in the excitement that it wasn't until that night, lying in bed and remembering the events of the day, that I realised that Dad's instincts in that moment, his intuition perhaps, had saved us both from getting run over, seriously hurt and possibly killed. Dad had been a biker since his college days, when he was a proud owner of an AGS 500. He'd only owned cars since, first a series of VW Beetles and then, much to my disappointment, Renaults. I was about 12 years old when he brought home a bike. It was only a Honda C90, the classic and extremely popular red and white step-through that was launched in 1964, the year I was born, but it was a motorcycle to me, and I was delighted. It was a thrill to be dropped off at school off the back of the bike, glossing over the fact that it was actually technically a scooter. Complete with my orange open-faced helmet, I felt like I was a biking hero to my friends and to the girls in my class. Dad had it for 3 years before announcing one day that he was going to get rid of it. Not enough oomph, was his reasoning. The pace of traffic on the roads into the city was getting faster, and he felt the C90 just didn't have the power to accelerate out of trouble, should that ever become necessary. He wouldn't be replacing it. He lied. A couple of weeks later, I'd just come in from school and was standing in the bay window at the front of our house, emptying my bag and getting homework organised, when an unfamiliar roar caught my attention. I looked up and saw a rider in full leathers, rounding the corner and pulling up right outside the house on a seriously nice machine. I started shouting through to Mum in the kitchen that we might have a visitor, when the rider pulled off his helmet, and it was Dad. He'd ridden up on a brand new Motor Guzzi V50, a 500cc V-twin Italian beauty, and on that day, even more than any other, Dad was my absolute hero. Going to school on that roaring beast gave my credibility an enormous boost, but that was actually the least of it. What was really special was going out on day trips. He knew some incredible roads around Northumberland, the borders, down into County Durham and across to the Lake District, and I quickly became an expert pillion on this fast bike, leaning into the bends in perfect harmony with my dad. The late July day when Prince Charles and Lady Di got married was scorching hot and particularly memorable. Neither of us had the slightest interest in watching the royal wedding on TV, so we jumped on the Guzzi and headed west to the lakes. On a sunny summer Saturday, that area is always busy with tourists, caravanners and day trippers. On that day, it seemed the entire world was glued to their televisions, and we had the road to ourselves, just as we'd hoped. He took me to all sorts of race meetings too, from the amateur scrambles and the fields close to home to the famous Gold Cup at Oliver's Mount near Scarborough, where the course is partly on an old racetrack that is on a beautiful wooded hillside and partly on public roads that are closed for the weekend. I love going to these events in the car, but rocking up on the back of an Italian motorcycle was a feeling like no other. As soon as I was 17, I bought a Kawasaki KH125, and suddenly we were able to go out together on 2 bikes. Dad was an advanced motorcycle rider and was great at giving me tips and pointers to help me pass my own riding test. When I did, I immediately upgraded to a Suzuki GS400. And I remember him being really unhappy one evening when I left him behind on some seriously twisty roads north of our town. When he eventually flagged me down into a lay-by, he said I was going far too fast for the conditions, namely patches of bright sunshine and deep shadow that had made it hard to see properly in the bends. He was right, of course. In 1989, when I was 34, we left the bikes at home and went to the Isle of Man TT, the only place in the world where the roads of an entire island are given over to hardcore professional racing for 2 whole weeks. It attracts top talent from all over the world. There are a handful of fatalities every year, and every year there are calls to ban it, which are always resisted on the basis that the riders know the risks and they're out there doing what they love. Dad took his cameras, of course, but of the 40+ rolls of 35mm film that he shot, the vast majority showed garden walls and trees, sometimes with just the tiniest sliver of a back wheel exiting the frame left. Those boys were so fast. When I was a young teenager, maybe 13 or 14, still in the days of the C90, Dad took me to a Greek island of Zante for a 2-week holiday. There was no airport on the island back then. I seem to remember they were planning to build one, but hadn't quite gotten around to it. Dad knew this, of course, but I'm not sure he thought through the implications of the 2 of us travelling for 24 hours straight. We pretty much used every form of transport known to man. A neighbour gave us a lift in his car to the station. We caught a train to Newcastle, then another to London. We took the tube across London to Heathrow. From Heathrow, we flew to Athens. We crossed the city by taxi and then caught a coach across to the west coast of mainland Greece, which memorably involved crossing the Corinth Canal. It was Nero, the Roman emperor, who first broke ground on the project in 67 AD, and it was finally finished in 1893. It took a long time with many failures and bankruptcies along the way, but today it stands as a very impressive feat of engineering. I was glad I stayed awake to see it. The coach took us to the port of Kylini, from where we took a ferry to Zakynthos, the capital of the island, and finally a minibus took us to our villa. It was raining when we arrived, the first time in living memory that Zante had seen rain in August. The only form of transport not involved in our 24-hour odyssey was a motorcycle. So Dad hired a 125 for a few days so we could explore the island, meet the locals, and, I suspect, because we were both missing the Honda. I'll never forget that first lunchtime we were out, walking into a tavern way up in the hills, looking for a bite to eat, and being greeted by a silence that suddenly descended on the place as we walked in the door, just like I'd seen in the Westerns. They turned out to be friendly enough, of course, and the Greek salad was colourful, fresh and delightful. We were heading back to the villa on a gravel road one oven-hot afternoon, wearing just shorts, sandals, t-shirts, no helmets. And we were following a little 3-wheel truck that was carrying lengths of timber way longer than itself, precariously balanced and badly tied down. After a while, it turned right and briefly disappeared into an olive grove, only to reappear moments later as it started reversing into our path. He hadn't turned off, he was just turning round. It was far too late for Dad to brake, especially on gravel, which invariably acts like ball bearings under the wheels of a bike that is braking or cornering hard, and would have had us off in an instant. Instead, thinking fast, Dad leaned the bike down hard left as we leaned hard right, so that the timber ends passed through the V-shaped gap we'd just created with the bike and our bodies. They were so close I remember them brushing the hairs on my forearm. Dad pulled over a mile or so later, and we sat in silence, in the pine-scented shade, listening to the cicadas until his hands stopped shaking. I woke up early on Boxing Day 1989, a few months after our trip to the Isle of Man, as I was due to spend a few days in the London office before returning to my parents' house for the new year. The plan was that after breakfast, I would drive Dad to the station in my company BMW, and while I caught the train south, Dad would take the car back to the house, where it would stay until my return. Only a few miles out of town, the car twitched. Black ice. I regained control. We just had time to remark on it when it went again, properly this time. The back end swung out right and the front wheels mounted the curb, while the steering wheel span uselessly through my hands as we slid sideways towards a large and very solid road sign. I saw it out of my side window, rushing up fast. "Oh, Dad," I remember saying. My next memory is screaming. Screaming from the searing pain that my brain has long since blocked out. The 90-degree bend in the middle of the driver's door had punched a 90-degree break in my right femur. My right foot was still over the accelerator pedal, and my hip more or less where it started, creating the crazy angle that I saw, looking down in horror at my snapped leg. Dad had managed to get out. I saw him through the windshield, almost dancing in anguish in front of the car, unhurt but wailing in his own torment as he believed, in that moment, as he later told me, that the car was about to burst into flames and roast me alive. He was soon led away by a kindly old couple from the house across the street. I can't remember who stayed with me. With both legs jammed firmly between the centre console and the immovable door, I was trapped in intense agony for over half an hour until the fire brigade arrived to give me nitrous oxide gas and cut me out of the wreckage. The orthopaedic surgeon at the hospital gave me a choice: either spend 3 months in traction while the bone healed, or have an operation to insert a K-nail, which is essentially a long titanium pin hammered down inside the length of the femur, straightening and strengthening it, secured with a screw at the hip end. I went for the operation and was out of the hospital in under 2 weeks, having been shown by a lovely physiotherapist how to use crutches on the flat, on slopes, and going up and down stairs. Weeks later, Dad and I visited the wreck at a local garage. The entire chassis was bent out of line by 1.5 feet, which came as a shock. This was a well-built German car, and the speed at the point of impact must have been far less than 30 miles an hour, yet the entire vehicle was totally bent out of shape. I was particularly intrigued by the roof, which had been caved in above the driver's door by the impact, to the same 90 degrees as the door, creating a sharp, downward, jagged tooth of metal at roughly the height of my temple. Only then did Dad tell me that a second or so before we crashed, he'd reached over his arm around my shoulders and pulled me down. I crashed with my head resting safely on his lap. 9 years later, while travelling in Nepal with an intrepid group of friends whose interests ranged from photography, botany, birdwatching, walking and climbing, Dad slipped and fell on some hotel steps in Kathmandu. We shared a dark sense of humour, Dad and I, and we found it faintly amusing that he'd happily hiked around the Annapurna mountain range and then hurt himself tripping over a bloody step. He came home in considerable pain, and eventually the doctors discovered a crumbling vertebrae. While recovering from this injury, the digestive disorders began. Firm reassurances from the doctor that these were nothing to worry about were eventually followed by a bowel cancer diagnosis. Inoperable, they said. Untreated, you have less than a year, they said. With chemo, you've got at least 2, they said. He decided to take up the offer of chemotherapy and was dead in 9 months. A week or so before he died, in his own bed, in a memory I can never unsee, he's standing naked in the bathroom, supported by my mum, with his back to me, shaking and skeletal. My fit, strong, active dad, not yet 70, now looked like one of those wretches who were rescued out of Belsen. The last time I saw him alive, he was more or less unconscious on morphine. I kissed him and he puckered his lips in a weak response. I know he knew it was me at that moment. I had a goatee beard at the time and he must have felt it scratch his sunken cheek. You saved my life 3 times, Dad. Yet when you were dying, all I could do was stand with Mum at your bedside and cry. Thank you.
Robert, thank you very much. That was a beautiful reading. So well done and so touching. And I can see now the beauty of the work stretched from the distillation of a poem into a short story. I can see the reason why our editor suggested fleshing out the work into something longer, because this story has certainly made its bones and made a major impression. Thank you very much, so much for the reading, Robert. And
you're very welcome. Thank you.
It was a wonderfully read work. I could actually stand there and see it with you while you were reading. and see everything that was happening. Excellent work. Thank you.
Pleasure.
So from Robert, we'll move forward to a poem by Trevor Maynard. Trevor is a very accomplished poet who lives near London. He's the author of 3 poetry books, a total of 12 plays, and is the editor of the international anthology series, The Poetic Bond. His most recent projects were curating and publishing poems from the lockdown, an anthology of 115 poets from all around the world, and editing Who Are We? 10 short stories from 10 authors on the themes of country, identity, and race. Trevor also will have a new poetry collection coming out and available to all in 2021. So that's something we all look forward to, Trevor. And Trevor is going to read to us tonight a poem called Figures. So without further ado, Trevor, it's all yours.
Trevor, it appears that you're on mute.
There you go, that'll help on it.
There we go. I can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Hello, Trevor. If you're ready, if you're all prepared, we can go ahead with your poem,
Right.
Figure.
Okay then.
Thank you.
Figures. Figures. The figures are a lot higher than they are saying. Up by a factor of 3, some say. The question is, who do I believe? They or some? Meanwhile, it is not the figures that are dying. Meanwhile, it is humans with given names. Mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, every personal descriptor. Meanwhile, it is such a mean time. The figures, they and some agree, are rising, thriving, spreading virus-like until becoming statistical gods. Which congregation will you join? They or some? Or will you be somewhere in between? Will you follow the statistical mean or none? Become an atheist and watch the white cherry blossom blow in the breeze across the graves of the dead, remembering every name of each human. Not the figures that they or some say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Thank you very much, Trevor. That was wonderful. We really enjoyed that. And for every time we watch television on the evening news, we're confronted with the figures, the daily death count and the daily totals across the US and Europe. And what you've really done is to put a human face and human suffering behind those figures. So you've really personalized the pandemic in a very acute way. So thank you very much for a lovely reading, Trevor. So from Trevor, we'll go back to another very relevant, timely event. It's a short story called Pursued by Bill Schillaci. The work will be read by Selin Tekgurler, who is our short story editor at October Hill. Bill, for background, was born in New York City and attended NYU, New York University. He worked for many years as an engineering writer and freelance environmental journalist. His short stories have appeared in print and online journals, and he lives in Ridgewood, New Jersey with his wife. So Selin will read the short story work Pursued by Bill Schillaci.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? I apologize that my camera isn't working, so you won't be able to see me, but hopefully the audio works. So This is pursued by Bill Schillaci. It was him. Ray Ray didn't see that right away. He just looked vaguely familiar, like the associate at Home Depot she had talked to about pressure-assisted toilet bowls, and then passed a week later walking his dog near Poe Park. She couldn't place him until it hit her hours later while she was brushing her teeth. This time, she didn't have to wait that long. From the east side of Orchard on a Sunday morning, gazing idly over the roofs of cars parked on both sides of the street, Ray Ray saw only half his face. He had a full head of white hair, striking and strange above youthful features. He was pushing a twin baby stroller. A trim blonde woman in black skinny jeans and an oversized gray hoodie had her arm hooked through his. He was out of uniform, which meant he was without a helmet with a shatterproof face shield, a Kelvar vest, leg armor, a chest-mounted two-way radio, Gestapo gloves, and, of course, his side-handled truncheon, the full riot gear ensemble. Altogether, the sighting was so fleeting she wondered days after if she would recognize her own father under similar conditions. Of course, her father, who was no slouch when it came to discipline, had never clubbed her into a feudally curled heap on the ground. It happened over a month ago, 20 or so seconds of murderous attempt that, at once, became the all-time low point in Ray Ray's 34 years. Oh yes, it was him. He was in the front line of police, and she was in the first wave of BLM protesters facing them. The thinking by the demonstration organizers, who were all men, was that the cops would be less likely to crack the skulls of women if the opposing sides made contact. Some women found this hilariously cowardly on their part. Other women who'd been doing this for decades said it wasn't out of line with their personal experiences, at least if the vanguard consisted of white women. But Ray Ray thought it unconscionable that a wall of white women should insulate her from the most perilous work of the protest. She got zero support from the sisters, but when the line started forming, a few bravely stepped up and locked arms. In retrospect, it was less a bad decision than bad luck that she should be squared up with the requisite sociopath and the failings of 30 cops. Their eyes met as he came at her. She knew she had hit the jackpot even before he seized her wrist with one hand and with the other raised his truncheon above his head. She was more than willing to abandon her post. I'm moving, she yelled at him. Please don't hit me. He spoke to her, but from behind his face shield, and in the ocean of shouts and chanted slogans, the words were just a mouthful of mumbles. The truncheon landed first against the elbow of the arm Ray Ray had protectively lifted. A paralyzing current radiated from the point of impact in opposite directions to her wrist, shoulder, neck, and jaw, disabling her ability to scream. With desperate strength, she wrenched free from his grip and cupped her elbow with her hand, exposing her face to the second blow, which had landed flush on the bridge of her nose. The pain was different than the one in her elbow, more crunch than flame, probably because she was now halfway to senselessness. She dropped to her knees on the blacktop and rolled onto her side. Above, he was an amorphous titan, with his helmeted head against the ceiling of heavy clouds. Blood filled Ray Ray's nostrils, bubbled across her lips, and dribbled off her chin. Her hand sought her nose, but the brain-body partnership was out of commission. She touched her chin, her eye, both misses. She chuckled to herself and thought about death. He bent over her and rotated his face shield upward. Even in her fog, Ray Ray wondered if he wanted his face to be the last thing she saw on Earth. That's when two strong hands dug into her armpits and dragged her along the ground at breathtaking speed. The cop was replaced by other bodies without helmets, framed by the sheer walls of skyscrapers. More hands on her back and legs lifted her off the pavement. Her head, which had become unbearably heavy, fell backward. She saw the ridiculously large gilded letters upside down over the bank of glass doors to the monument to greed behind her. She identified the T and the R and the P. She tried to assemble them into a word, and it came out as turnip. She knew that was wrong, but it was the best she could do. Later, during the hazy hours she spent in Mount Sinai's emergency ward, one of her rescuers assured her that the assault had been filmed and her attacker would be held accountable. Although unbroken, her elbow had ballooned to twice its normal size and displayed all the festive colors of her youngest cousin's quinceañera. A nurse had her keep it in a basin of ice while the emergency physician squirted lidocaine into her nose, which, she was told, assuredly was broken, and then stuffed rolls of gauze so far into her nostrils that she felt them in her throat. The doctor advised a CT scan, and Ray Ray waited on her back on a gurney in the corridor, breathing noisily through her mouth and running her fingertips across the traces of crusted blood on her face. The whole time, friends from her group stayed with her, the last one wheeling her out to the street, making sure she made it into a lift for the ride home to the Bronx. 3 days later, she was able to flex her wounded arm. After another week, she had her nose reset, so the bump she had since childhood was miraculously gone. Her new foxier look helped with Ray Ray's mood, and it also helped when she was able to get off the Pyridine. But except for her visit to the nose doctor and furtive dashes to the market, she did not leave her apartment. She worked in administration in the largest public high school in the borough and had so many sick days she'd lost count. As the body bruises settled down, the emotional ones took flight. She alternately perspired copiously with fear or trembled with rage. Compulsively, she read about PTSD and the backgrounds of psychotherapists on her health plan who treated it. She called the organizers of the demonstration and asked about the promised video of her assault, which would help put a name to the cop and start the quest for the retaliation she desired, almost as much as the one to feel normal again. They told her there were a lot of videos, and they were looking for the one that showed the unprovoked attack. Assurances that there was such a video phased into hearing about inquiries to TV stations about raw film footage, and then into, let's wait and see if anything turns up. Weeks passed. Tumultuous scenes of the demonstration's opposing sides clashing became hits on social media. The one of Ray Ray and her cop, if it ever existed, never surfaced. She went back to work accompanied by a new peculiarity, a muscle twitch that out of nowhere caused her right leg to bounce uncontrollably while she was sitting at her desk. She tried to relax, to breathe, but her leg kept jumping until she pushed down on her thigh with all her strength. The couple across the street was rolling their babies north toward the gentrified half of Orchard, and, for a while after making out the cop, Ray Ray continued south to the discount stores that led deeper into Chinatown. She liked getting up early on Sundays and taking the D train from Bedford Park, a 1-hour ride over the length of 2 boroughs, to the Grand Street station to browse for shoes and knock off designer handbags, and then splurge for dim sum at her favorite place on Mott Street. This was her first outing to Lower Manhattan since before the demonstration and her new understanding of what fear does to a person. Early that morning in bed, watching the winter sun push aside the darkness behind her blinds, she decided it was time to regain her life. It was a decision she'd gotten close to making on several previous Sunday mornings, and on this day she was going to make it happen. Little by little, she'd been putting the assault behind her, or at least placing it in the context of all she had achieved in life. She'd read about the steps to beat trauma, talk honestly to friends and family, exercise, eat right, clean your apartment, and talk. The talking got tiring except for one woman from her group, single like Ray Ray, who was close to 70 and proudly bore the scars from 50 years of street battles. This is combat, she told Ray Ray. You signed up to be a soldier, and soldiers don't take battlefield injuries personally. Get over it. It was hard to hear, but the words stuck with her more than all the soothing platitudes that entered and exited her head like so much mall music. But how do the rules of combat apply when you stroll past your enemy on a peaceful city street? The question distracted her from her reason for being on Orchard in the first place. She stopped in the midst of foot traffic, turned, and peered north. He was tall, her cop. A flicker of his white hair was visible above the heads of pedestrians more than a block away. And then it was gone. She shrugged. What was she thinking, spoiling her special morning, her breakthrough day, by throwing fresh fuel onto the slowly healing hurt under her skin? What could she hope to gain? Chase down the man and demand to know if he remembered her? In what daydream would he say, yes, of course, the protester I put into the hospital. My bad. Tell me, how can I make it up to you? The more plausible scenario was denial and threat, maybe another assault from a dangerous person, more fear, and more PTSD. It was a fool's mission, and yet she found herself on the move, crossing Orchard, reversing direction, heeding gut instinct, waving away better judgment like a bad smell. Ray Ray came to the place where she estimated the cop and his family had dropped out of sight. Elevating on her toes, she looked hard to the north, person to person, head to head, finding nothing. She was in front of the largest houseware stores in the neighborhood. Unwashed windows on both sides of the front doors were painted with large Chinese characters, red with yellow borders. Behind the windows was a preview of what was inside. Interlocking trash barrels and coiled garden hoses rising out of sight, tall water heaters, a few kitchen ranges, stacks of lawn chair cushions, bundles of dust mops, and mismatched piles of cardboard boxes, all of it jammed together with no plausible organization or spaces in between. The store stocked every conceivable household import from the Far East that could be squeezed onto its 2 floors and basement level, each twice the size of a basketball court. It was discount warehouse vogue at its finest. Ray Ray had seen a report on Channel 2's local news that the store was a formidable holdout against online shopping, all its curb appeal sacrificed to the drawing power of rock-bottom prices. According to the reporter, the place had infiltrated the city's yuppie pipeline. Apparently, the upwardly mobile were growing fond of telling party guests it's where they bought their $1.99 napkin holders, items selling at Williams-Sonoma for $30 a piece. Ray Ray had been inside before to browse, just handling the merchandise, enjoying the wealth of human invention, never once making a purchase. If her cop was inside, her strategy should be simple. Stay right where she was until he exited. She toned down the aggression. She didn't have to confront him and terrify his wife and probably herself as well. One option was to follow them on foot, but that wouldn't work if they had a car or called a rideshare. The safer course would be to just snap his portrait. It would be good enough to start the process of identification and payback that would help her get back to being the person she had been, or at least the person she thought she was, a person of courage, a soldier who would not retreat to the back end of the protest. She had put her trust in her own ability to heal, but with his reappearance, it was clear that passive recovery would not be enough. She would stand where she was, watching the doors and waiting for as long as it took until her cop emerged, or until it was obvious that he wasn't inside at all. And if that was the case, if she had waited too long, she would still know that she had tried, that she didn't flee at the sight of him, that he did not hold that awful power over her. She stationed herself near a parking meter. At once, her legs started up, intermittent at first, just a few jiggles. Then in no time, her foot was pounding the concrete with a mad life of its own. She had to grasp the meter with both hands so she didn't look like she was having an epileptic seizure. Thinking only she had to move, she hurried across the sidewalk and pushed through the door of the big store. The inside was as she remembered it, as cluttered as the window dressing. Beyond a triad of bustling checkout counters, tall shelves packed with products were separated by narrow aisles through which customers with tiny shopping carts squeezed past each other. She gave up on the idea of being stationary and walked the floor, wall to wall, peering down the aisles without entering them, continually checking the exit behind her. After the third pass turned up without the cop, she had a choice, the second floor or basement. She had no doubt that if she chose one, he'd be on the other and would slip away from her, the single chance she'd been given lost, unless, of course, she ran. In the days that followed, she would think of what happened next as an exercise in futility, but a necessary one. It stayed with her as a sequence of action clips, like a trailer for a martial arts movie stringing together bits of frenetic hand-to-hand combat scenes. There she was, jogging toward the stairwell near a wall, slicing between shoppers, including 2 chatting women who squealed in fright. She descended the stairs 2 at a time and had to run up and down the basement aisles that, unlike the first floor, were arranged in a confounding people-eating maze. She doubted her search was complete, but she was losing time and bounded back up the stairs, reaching the second floor, which was populated by large appliances, living room furniture, and kitchenette sets. Breathing rapidly and damp with sweat, she slowed to a fast walk. It was near the air conditioners, assembled like everything else to resemble a primitive barricade against invaders, where they stopped her. There were 2 of them, an Asian woman about Ray Ray's size and age and a burly man, both suited up in faux security uniforms. They stood side by side, blocking her as she circled the air conditioners. Somehow Ray Ray restrained herself from trying to push between them. "Why are you running?" asked the big guard. "I'm not running," said Ray Ray. "You were running downstairs." "I'm not running now. I'm looking for someone." "Who?" "A cop who almost killed me." The guard was at least a foot taller than his partner and outweighed her, conceivably by a factor of 3. But they both eyed Ray Ray with the identical expressions of alarm. "Where? Here?" the man said. "No, at a BLM protest. I thought I saw him come into your store. He was pushing a baby carriage, a wide one for 2 kids. What's a BLM protest?" "There have been no baby carriages," said the other guard. "I've been at the door all morning. I saw you come in, but no carriage." She spoke softly, almost with a child's voice and with the faintest of accents. It was something that may have escaped the casual listener, but at the high school, Ray Ray had become attuned to the subtlest inflections that students carried with them from every part of the globe. The guard's hair was pulled back from her forehead and secured behind, but softly, not in the metallic sock bun style favored by female cops. Of course you saw me. I see everybody. Sure you do, said Ray Ray. But she didn't care if she'd been profiled. The pursuit, such as it was over, and already she was more relieved than disappointed. Are you here to buy something? The other guard said. No. Aaron, let me handle this from here, said his partner. Aaron sighed, turned, and departed massively through the towers of inventory. How about I walk you out, said the guard. Together they took the stairs. Ray Ray asked if she could use the restroom, where she surprised herself by letting loose a single powerful sob in front of the mirror. She then washed her face. I'm sorry for what happened to you, the guard said at the front door. I did a protest too. BLM. Across the Brooklyn Bridge. It was peaceful. Glad to hear it. I like your shirt, the guard said, pointing at Ray Ray's t-shirt, the words Metallica and Justice for All bracketing a sketch of the goddess of justice with her scale. But what is this Metallica? The guard brought her forefinger right up to the t-shirt and, when Ray Ray didn't flinch, made the barest contact with the fabric. Some 80s heavy metal group. My uncle sent it to me. Well, said the guard. Well, said Ray Ray. Thanks for going easy on me. Not that I did anything wrong. The guard held open the door, and when Ray Ray went through, she followed her out to Orchard. Facing Ray Ray, she unsnapped something in her hair and shook her head. Thick blue-black plaits fell voluptuously about her shoulders. So, what are you doing now? Looking for your cop? No, I'm getting dim sum at Ping's. Oh, it's on Mott Street. I know where it is, said the guard. She checked her wristwatch and then glanced along Orchard, north to south, before returning to Ray Ray. You want some company? Ray Ray gawked at her, but only for a split second. She then turned up one side of her mouth, in a pixie-ish way, she hoped. She would not think again about her bungled pursuit of the cop until she was back on the D, heading home to the Bronx.
Thank you very much, Selin. That was a wonderful reading of a very terrifying work by Bill Schillaci. We thank Bill for sharing that work with us, and we remember that during the summer in which George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, there were also many brave people who were beaten and abused by the police in New York City, among other places. And this is a rather terrifying tale of one such encounter. There were many others. So thank you very much to Bill, and thank you, Selin, for the reading. It was wonderful. Moving on, we have next a poem by Dominic Windram called Quietus, Lockdown Summer 2020. Dominic is a poet and personal tutor from Hartlepool in the northeast of England, who is currently collaborating with a German musical composer who is adapting several of Dominic's lyrical poems into song form. Dominic is now a resident poet on the Progressive News Network hosted by Rick Spizak. So Dominic, we're looking forward to hearing your new work, Quietus.
Thanks, Richard. So here is Quietus, Lockdown, Summer 2020. Nothing much has happened lately, and I'm hosting a myriad solitudes. So I have sunk with the air into a quietus, as I watch the sun imbibe the dew that's scattered across the morning grass. I am becoming decidedly lazy. Summer seems to slow down time in a surreal way. It blurs truth and fiction, like the hazy spread of dreams. Summer is for me the gentle pronouncing of two soft syllables, cushions of air in which I now recline. I watch its drowsy light sprawl among the red campion and the dead nettle. I watch it as it pauses briefly to meditate upon the wind-blown remnants of forget-me-nots. I find this bittersweet, as love's illustrious angels have long since departed the ruined realms that I now inhabit. I'm briefly soothed by the murmur of bees and melodious birdsong, yet I'm aware that the sundial casts unnerving shadows across my future. I'm plagued with grave doubts. Soon solemn autumn will issue forth colder winds. and I want to be ready to face the world again.
Beautiful, Dominic. Thank you very much for that lovely reading. Lovely work, and quite a different take on the summer and the pandemic. So very interesting perspective poetically, I think. Much different approach than Trevor took, but we love your work. I think it's excellent work, Dominic. Thank you very much for the reading.
Thank you.
We just have a brief message, a word from Heather Dunlop, who is our fundraising manager. She has a brief message for everyone out there. We'd like to just turn the floor over to Heather for a moment.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, that's what I do. And I just wanted to talk about that for a second after enjoying a lot of really great reading so far, which I hope everyone else has been enjoying. Most of this work has been brought to you by the quarterly editions put out by October Hill magazine, and we're working towards our final campaign of 2020, as last Tuesday was Giving Tuesday. As we aspire to expand the scope of our magazine and achieve our goal of producing a print companion in the new year. In an effort to incentivize some help, a member of the October Hill community is going to match up donations up to $500 until the end of the year. So hopefully any donation you make, will be doubled. So that could make a huge difference for us. We're all volunteers, and all of our efforts are going towards making the magazine the best it can be and to uplift writers and artists of all different backgrounds. So any support that you could show would be greatly appreciated, and especially in this run up to the end of the year. And so if you have any questions or want to contribute towards our year-end fundraising campaign, just email me. I'm hdunlop@octoberhillmagazine.com. The spelling is in my little window there if you need help. That's all. Just wanted to talk about our campaign for the year-end and our plans for the new year going forward and what we have planned.
Thank you very much, Heather. I appreciate the message. Do we have our matching donor on the air with us this evening, Mr. Hussein Al-Bahrani?
Hi, Richard. I believe everybody can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, Hussein.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, and hello, everyone. I wanted to just take a moment to say thank you to October Hill, the management and staff. It's been a journey with you guys, and I feel that this is the least that I can do for an organization that completely operated with volunteers for almost 4 years. Growing up in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, and as a non-English speaker that got into English as a second language and lived here in the States for the past 15 years, there's a longing and love for the language and for the art and for the community. And what a better way to find a platform like October Hill that touched a lot of my personal beliefs, things that I aspire for in a joyous moment. With that, I'm not a poet or an author of stories, but a person that is avid in reading and loving that kind of work. It's said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you. It's also said that one ought to read every day at least a song or hear a poem and look at a fine picture. And between all of this, I think, and I sincerely see that October Hill have matched all of this and allowed me for the past 3 years to enjoy those 4 volumes that they created, the issues, the stories, the poetry, the visual submissions. And it's just been a wonderful, wonderful companion for me for that past time. With that, I felt compelled to at least put forefront what I can, which is not submitting a story, not submitting a poetry, but hopefully submitting what I can out of my pocket. I encourage all of you to do so. This is a place that have served the community and served the art, and as an outsider, I could not vouch for this more. So for any money that is put by you or anybody else outside today's setting to the end of the year, I'm happy to match that $500 for whatever it may be. So thank you, October Hell, and I'm really excited to hear the rest of these stories and poetry. Thank you for putting this together. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Hussein, for stepping up. We appreciate your support, your generosity, and thank you for taking time to speak with us this evening. So we'd like to continue with our program now with another short story by Dennis Vannatta. That's Vannatta, V-A-N-N-A-T-T-A, who is a Pushcart and Porter Prize winner with stories published in many magazines and anthologies, including River Styx, Sheridan Review, Boulevard, and Antioch Review. His sixth collection of stories, The Only World You Get, was recently published by Et Alia Press. That's E-T Alia, A-L-I-A Press. Dennis will not read tonight. His work is entitled Glory Days, and if that sounds familiar to many people out there, you're absolutely correct. It's the title of a Bruce Springsteen song, Glory Days. And the poem, the short story will be read by Julia Romero, who is our one of our book reviewers and proofreaders. Julia does a fine job with both, and this is in this work, I'm sure you're going to find considerable humor and pathos. So without further ado, Julia, please take it away.
Thank you, Richard.
You're welcome.
This is Glory Days by Dennis Vannatta, Part 1. Archie Slater's calendar says 2015 like everyone else's, but his heart isn't in it. Give Archie the 90s and keep the rest of it. 1996 to be exact, when he was not quite 18 and a big Bruce Springsteen fan and drove from Little Rock to Milwaukee to catch the Ghost of Tom Joy tour at the Riverside Theater. Only he never made it, thanks to that idiot Ricky Tressenreiter. It was Ricky who, when they pulled into Marion, Illinois for a burger, discovered the left rear tire of their festival was almost flat, walked over to a police car parked on McDonald's lot and asked the cop where they could get a tire fixed. The Marion police force is probably as neighborly as the next bunch, but they didn't take kindly to questions asked with 4 inches of rank doobie hanging from the corner of some smirking punk's mouth. Busted. Archie, too. Even today, for the life of him, Archie can't remember what happened to Ricky or the Festiva, which belonged to one of them, maybe Archie. He wasn't that into material possessions back then, and if the car was his, he didn't miss it. Didn't miss Ricky either. Didn't even regret missing the Springsteen concert because it was while he was being processed into the Marion jail that he met Katrina Peabody, a clerk and a big Springsteen fan herself who had never been out of Illinois. The idea of someone from way down south just picking up and driving way up north for a concert, I mean, wow. If that cute guy with the long blonde hair and slow way of talking would take her with him, well, he would. She lost his paperwork but found the keys to her brother's Dodge Ram, and they were gone. Not to Milwaukee, but south as fast as they could go to the land of opportunity. Ha, in retrospect, ha. They were never clear on the statute of limitations on car theft and fleeing drug charges, and so hadn't been back to Illinois since. They got married and were quite happy in Little Rock for a while. But 16 years is more than a while. The big blow-up came before Christmas last year. They'd both been drinking. Katrina, her usual beer, which Archie had given up on because it made him gassy, and he, the Gallo Burgundy that he bought in 3-liter jugs and drank like water. She came back into the den with a fresh Miller Lite and caught him looking at a Penny's ad, turned to women's clothing. She yanked it out of his hands. No, we're doing it different this year. We're not buying each other Christmas presents. I'll buy what I want for myself and you buy what you want for yourself. That way, we'll each wind up with something we really like. Yeah, Kat, that sounds real romantic. Romantic? I think I remember that. That was something from last century, wasn't it? There ensued not a fight exactly, but something much more harmful to a relationship: candor. It came down to this. He loved every single thing about her and wanted to spend all his days with her while she still loved him, but was bored and had been for years. Where was her golden-haired wild child who jumped in a car with a buddy and a bag of marijuana and driven across 3 states to listen to 2 hours of Bruce Springsteen? Her boredom unhinged him, and his pain was twofold. He was losing his wife and losing his sense of who he was. Katrina had presented him with a new, unwelcome, tedious Archie Slater. His whole life now seemed trivial and, well, silly, starting with his nickname, Archie, which was given to him in junior high when his family moved to Odessa, Texas for a couple of years. Archie was okay in Texas, but in Arkansas? Ludicrous. Then there was his job working for Bastion Home Security Services. He'd sold, installed, and maintained scores of security systems over the years, but did he know for a fact that even once in all that time, his labors had resulted in a family being saved from a home invasion, or even prevented a lawn chair from being stolen from their back porch? No. My name is Stephen, he longed to shout. My life has had worth. My wife can look at me and feel... What did Katrina feel? Boredom. Katrina didn't leave him immediately after what he came to think of as the holiday massacre. She still came back to the apartment after her shift at the med center where she was a nurse practitioner, still shared the cooking and cleaning duties, hell, still slept in the same bed. But she was gone anyway. Or maybe he was the one who was gone, a piece of unwanted furniture she was just waiting for the Goodwill van to come and haul off. He wanted her and their good times back so bad he could hardly bear it. He was drawn to what caused him pain. Staring at her profile as she sat in the lazy boy watching TV, she'd abandoned the sofa to him. Taking her dirty laundry, scrubs, sweaters, jeans, bras, panties out of the hamper and pressing his face into it and wanting to die, listening over and over again to his old Springsteen CDs. It was while listening to The Boss that the idea came to him. Katrina had loved the old Archie Slater, not just loved him, but had been thrilled by him, enough to commit larceny and flee friends and family and make a new life with him in a strange land. All he had to do to get her back was recapture that spontaneous, fearless, youthful Archie. It didn't have anything to do with age. It all hinged on what he was willing to do, to risk. Failure, humiliation, what were they? Nothing compared to the pain of losing Katrina. This is what he would do. On Valentine's Day, less than 3 weeks away, he would serenade Katrina, accompanying himself on the guitar with a Bruce Springsteen song. He couldn't sing a lick, of course, but that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that, as best as he could remember, he never so much as held a guitar in his hands. Before the total absurdity of his enterprise caught up with him, it was right on his heels and seemed to be gaining on him. He jumped in his car and drove down to Malachi's Music on 12th Street. Archie headed toward a youngish guy behind the counter, but was intercepted by a tall, stooped, gray-headed man, old Malachi himself, whom Archie had seen in commercials for the store on TV. Archie told him he was interested in a guitar. He was a big Bruce Springsteen fan. Did Mr. Malachi happen to know Fender Esquire? Malachi said before Archie could finish the question. Archie was surprised at first, but did some quick mental math and decided the old guy had probably cut his musical teeth on Hendrix and Clapton and the like, and would still have been a young man when the boss came on the scene. Encouraged by this thought, Archie found himself telling Malachi his plan. Not what motivated him, the shock and hurt and fear of abandonment, but the wish to impress his lady love by serenading her with a Springsteen song. Once again, Malachi surprised him, for instead of guffawing at the outlandishness of the notion, he stood tapping his bucktooth with his index finger a moment, then pointed that same finger at Archie and said, "I think you might be able to pull it off. Not play in any true musical sense, but do enough to press your old lady. What you could try is Born in the USA." "Born in the USA? You're shitting me. That's our song." Ha, well, you were born under Lucky Star in the USA then, because that's a song I think you could sort of fake your way through by just playing one chord. You could learn a passable B major chord. You could hit that baby on every born in the lyrics and every downbeat, and it might not be the boss, but if your old lady still has anything in her heart for you, she might just dig it. Now let's find a guitar for you, and then I'll give you a quick lesson on the B major chord. Malachi didn't try to sell him anything remotely like Bruce's Fender because he didn't want to take advantage of a fool in love, he said. But he sold him a used Squire Bullet Stratocaster for $59. He threw in a free 4-minute lesson on fingering the B major chord. After Archie tried it a few times, Malachi covered his ears and ordered him out of the store. Archie went back to the apartment and practiced every chance he got for 2 weeks. Since he worked a normal 9 to 5 and Katrina worked the swing shift at the hospital, he had a lot of opportunities and needed them all. It was surprisingly difficult. Every once in a while, he would, as if by accident, strum something that actually seemed to be roughly allied to the world of music, but much more often it sounded like he was dropping a succession of cabbages onto a linoleum floor. He kept at it, bought a pick to relieve his tender fingertips, and after a week, thought, hey, it might just be possible. Then he tried adding vocals, tempo, oh, the humanity. At the end of the second week, he knew it was never going to be good, but he might get close enough that at least Katrina would recognize the song, appreciate the effort, and maybe think it was cute. Like you think a long-eared puppy tripping over his feet was cute. Hey, it was the thought that counted, wasn't it? Archie sure hoped so, because if she could see what he was thinking, she'd count it in the high numbers. He loved her, so. The Sunday before Valentine's Day had ended. They were cleaning up after dinner and, as usual, had the radio on. And what song serenaded them as Archie washed and Katrina dried? Born in the USA. Not such a great coincidence, since the local oldie station apparently owned no more than 8 or 9 songs, which they played over and over. Archie couldn't help himself. He glanced over at Katrina with a little smile, and she caught him at it. What's that smile for? Oh, nothing, the song is all. What song? Born in the USA. Oh, well, what about it? It's it being our song and all. Born in the USA is our song? Like hell it is. Of course it is. You love Springsteen. I do like Springsteen, but Born in the USA gives me a headache. It's the most boring song he ever wrote. What are you saying? That's the song we sang driving through Illinois, getting away from Marion. Katrina started to say something, but then stopped and looked away for a moment, thinking. Then she snapped her fingers and said, "You're right, but we didn't sing it like that. We sang Born in the USA, all the way through southern Illinois, because that's the most boring drive in the world." Then he remembered it too. She was right. That's the way they had sung it, which didn't make Born in the USA their song at all. Didn't mean Katrina loved it or even liked it. No, their life together had started with her being bored, and that's just where it was ending. The next day, he was so down he couldn't eat his Whopper at Burger King. Justin Hastings, who drove the other truck for Bastion and frequently ate lunch with Archie, asked him what was wrong. Justin was the closest Archie had to a buddy, so he told him. He thought Justin, who was single and quite a player, would just laugh, but instead he nodded sympathetically and said, "I don't blame you for wanting to keep that woman in your sights. Katrina is a fine-looking woman. What is her favorite Springsteen song, by the way?" "Dancing in the Dark," I asked her. Justin whistled. "You're not going to play Dancing in the Dark in one chord." "Do you know anything about music?" Archie asked before remembering that Justin had told him about being in a hair band back in the day. He still had the hair too, long and brown with gold streaks. He kept it in a ponytail in the job, but Archie had seen it flying free. Archie bet he didn't have any trouble keeping his bed warm. "I can play a little guitar," Justin said, and then thought a minute. "Dancing in the Dark is a lot more musically complex than Born in the USA, but you might be able to do a passable job of it in 3 chords." "You could maybe, not me. I'm through with that." "So Katrina's not worth it?" "I never said that." "Well, then." They met to work on Dancing in the Dark 2 or 3 times a week in Archie's apartment while Katrina was at work. Archie furnished the beer, and they go through a 6-pack between them, 4 for Justin, 2 for Archie, who still had that gas thing but was embarrassed to drink wine in front of a macho guy like Justin. Archie hid the empties down at the bottom of the garbage can so Katrina wouldn't find them. On Sunday, the doorbell rang, and Katrina answered it, coming back with Justin in tow. "I've got a book for you," Justin said to Archie, and Katrina laughed. A book for Archie? She didn't bother looking at it. She wasn't interested in anything about him. Katrina went to the bathroom, and Justin whispered, "Sorry, Archie, I thought she worked on Sunday." "Well, no harm done. We better take a look at the book. What the hell is it?" They sat at the little kitchen table, and Justin showed it to him. It was a Springsteen fake book for guitar. "See," Justin said, turning the pages until he found the one he wanted. "It's got the score for Dancing in the Dark. I've gone through and marked the chords for you. Not all of them are, of course, but the ones you might get by with." It looked like a Chinese Sharky, who shook his head mournfully. "Don't make it harder than it is, Archie. Anybody with 10 fingers can play it if they work at it hard enough. Not play it well, of course, but maybe enough to do the trick." Katrina came into the kitchen to get a Snapple from the fridge and walked back out. Justin watched her coming and going, looked her up and down, and didn't try to hide it. When he left a few minutes later, he said bye to Katrina, and she waved her fingers at him without looking up from her magazine. But when the door closed, she said, still without looking up, "That Justin is a long, tall drink of something, isn't he?" A couple of weeks later, just for the hell of it, not because he had any good reason to suspect anything, Archie rigged a miniature nanny cam in the AC vent in their bedroom, and there they were. He watched the recording again and again, but it was Katrina and Justin every time. When he moved out, Archie took his guitar and one suitcase full of clothes and toiletries. Katrina could have everything else. In fact, she could have the guitar and suitcase too. Part 2. He moved into a big house on 8th Street that had once been grand, probably, but had long ago gone to seed and was now divided into a studio and 2-room apartments that were rented by the month or even week. That kind of place. Archie rented by the week. He told the landlord, Max something or other, he wouldn't need it long because soon he'd be moving back with his wife. Max nodded like he heard that one before. Archie's room, a bed, tiny living area, even tinier kitchen plus bathroom, was on the 2nd floor. He met his neighbor down the hall, Rachel Durant, when she came to complain about his loud music. When she discovered it wasn't some punk shit or other he was playing on a boombox, but was Archie himself playing his guitar, she apologized. "Hell, I'm a musician too. Piano. I started out playing in church when I was a kid. Piano at first, but then organ. I bet I could still play and mean in the sweet by and by. Then I graduated to jazz. I played in a jazz trio for a while, but hell, you can't make any money in Arkansas playing jazz. Then I waited tables and played at a piano bar on Markham downtown, requests mostly. Broadway show tunes, Johnny Mercer and Hoagie Carmichael, stuff like that. Funny thing is, I found out that's the stuff I like best. Gotta go with what you love." "Yes, you do," Archie said, standing in the doorway, waiting for a chance to close it on her. But she must have mistaken his body language for an invitation because she pushed past him and made herself at home on the only chair. Archie closed the door and went and sat on the bed. "So, what are you trying to play?" He hesitated, but then thought, what's the harm? "Dancing in the Dark," he said. "Dancing in the Dark? That's a beautiful song, but honey, you're way, way off. It goes like this." Rachel proceeded to whistle a few bars of the melody. "You can whistle better than I can play, Rachel. I'll admit that, and that's a real pretty tune, but I'm here to tell you that that's not Dancing in the Dark." "The hell you say?" "The hell I do say." "Okay, smart guy, I'll show you." Before he could say anything, she was out the door, then back in a minute with a book. She opened it up and showed him a page, a musical score, which like all the other scores, looked like hen scratchings to him. But sure enough, there was the title, Dancing in the Dark. And then he saw music by Arthur Schwartz, lyrics by Howard Dietz. "What gives?" he said. "I know for a goddamn fact that Bruce Springsteen wrote Dancing in the Dark. I've got it in a fake book. That's what I've been trying to learn it by. Look." He went to a cabinet over the stove where the Springsteen fake book stood next to the Cheerios, took it down and showed it to Rachel. "Ha, now that you mention it, I have heard this version. I'm not much into rock, though. That's why I lost my job at the piano bar when they started requesting Aerosmith and crap like that. But hey, I do admire you for taking on something new. Me, I'm going in the opposite direction. Music used to be number one for me, but I haven't played the piano in probably 15 years. Oh, I've got this little electric piano keyboard thing I bought at Walmart for 40 bucks, I think it was. Thing you buy for a kid. I fool around with that sometimes, but that's not the same thing as playing piano. Sounds like you miss music. I do. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. A lot. She looked it. She was 43, she told him at some point in the evening, but looked years older. She was tall and thin, like someone who got most of her calories from a liquor bottle, and a bottle was where her blonde hair color came from, too. She looked like a woman that life had been hard on, and she'd been hard on life right back. Probably, he decided. She'd once been pretty. They talked a lot that first night. He gave her the short version of his breakup with Katrina and then about his job. She said nothing was more important than home security because she'd had apartments broken into 3 times, and one of the times the guys would have raped her, except she cut him with a razor. After that, he mostly listened while she talked on, not like a natural talker, but like someone who'd been alone too long and had it all stored within her, and now it was coming out. They had sex, the first time for Archie since before the holiday massacre. Rachel looked like a woman who'd been around the block a few times, knew all the tricks, and he expected something wet and wild. Instead, it was more just sort of friendly. Friendly was all right, he decided. Just what he needed, in fact. After they finished and had their clothes back on, Rachel looked around the room and said, "So you've got one of the one-room jobs. Mine's too. You know, you can come in with me and we could split the rent and we'd both be ahead on the deal. Hey, don't have a heart attack on me. I was just fooling with you." Time passed. Justin quit at Bastion. Guilt, maybe, and Archie Hurd moved in with Katrina. Archie missed them both. He continued working on Dancing in the Dark, but then gave up on it. What was the point? He stuck the guitar in his closet behind the suit he had since high school, the one he wore to weddings and funerals. He saw a lot of Rachel. One other time she mentioned his moving in with her, but he laughed like it was a good joke, so she dropped it. She noticed he wasn't playing the guitar anymore and asked him about it. "Oh, it was just something out of my past anyway," he said. "It didn't mean anything." "I hate to see you give up on music, Stevie," she said. He introduced himself as Steve, but she'd immediately started calling him Stevie. Well, it beat the hell out of Archie. "But the past, yeah, who needs it? Forget that shit." He nodded like he agreed, but said, "Easy to say, but what if the past is all you got?" "Well, what about the present?" They were in his apartment, and now he looked around like he was seeing it for the first time. "Yeah, well, the present doesn't look too hot to me either." For an instant, a look flickered across Rachel's face as if she understood that she was part of his drab present. But then she forced a smile and said brightly, "You've always got the future to look forward to. You never can tell. Your glory may still be to come." Your glory may still be to come. It didn't sound like something Rachel would say. He bet she got it from one of her church hymns. Archie had never had much use for church himself, but he didn't have anything major against it. He tried to picture Rachel, hard and weathered, in church, and suddenly had a vision of a young girl with blonde ringlets, happy and hopeful. He reached over and laid his hand gently on top of hers. She seemed moved. The next weekend, Rachel invited him to her apartment for dinner. They were over at each other's apartments almost daily, but had never done anything as formal as issue an invitation. Rachel, skittish and loud, seemed to be feeling the pressure, and Archie had a hard time thinking of anything to say. To fill the awkward silences, Rachel talked too much, too fast. Both seemed grateful when the food was ready so they could just sit and eat. Spaghetti with red sauce, Italian bread, red wine in one of those straw-wrapped bottles, and to complete the Italian theme, Rachel said, Neapolitan ice cream. For some reason, Archie was certainly no sophisticate. Finding the empty ragu jar in the trash while helping to clean up afterward depressed the hell out of him. They called it a night early. They never even had sex. Over the next few days, Archie drove by his old apartment several times on the off chance he'd catch a glimpse of Katrina. No such luck. He never saw her or her car, or Justin's car, for that matter. Maybe they moved. What would he have done if he'd seen her? Looked. Had it really been so great with Katrina that he should feel so bad now? If so, it'd been a long, long time ago. What now, though? That was the question. Katrina was done, over with, and Rachel? The probability that things could keep on as they were now and that it would be all right with Rachel depressed him worse than the empty ragu jar. He was too old to expect roses and violins and purple sunsets. But there had to be more to keeping two people together than just a shared apartment hallway. He kept seeing her, though, waiting for it to end, or for that other thing, he didn't know what, some sign that it shouldn't end. The following Monday after work, Archie showered and changed and went down to Rachel's apartment. They were going to try that pizza place on Contrell everybody raved about. They almost never went out, but he felt he should pay Rachel back for the Italian dinner. When he suggested it, Rachel was excited as a kid. He rang the doorbell and heard her inside calling something. He tried the door, which was unlocked. He stepped inside. Rachel shouted to him from the bathroom, "I just got out of the shower. I'll be out in a couple of minutes. Make yourself at home. Don't go into the bedroom, though. It's a real mess. Stay out of the bedroom." Of course, he went into the bedroom. The bed was made, no clothes on the floor, the carpet clean as far as he could see. Where was the mess? Then he saw, on the little makeup table with a row of lights above the mirror, Rachel's keyboard. Beside it was a large book. Archie walked over to the table, although he could see from the door what the book was, his Bruce Springsteen fake book. He hadn't thought about it since he gave up on the guitar. He didn't need to look to see what it was turned to either. But he looked. Yeah, Dancing in the Dark. He found the other book, Rachel's book of scores, in the little magazine rack by the stuffed chair in the living room. He took it with him back to his apartment and set it down next to his guitar and was back to her apartment before she got out of the bathroom.
Thank you very much, Julia. Wonderful reading. I hope everybody enjoyed that. Enjoyed the humor and the pathos of it. Excellent reading, Julia. Thank you very much.
Of course.
So we'll go next. We'll move on to some poetry from Canada. Ivanka Fear is a writer from Ontario, Canada, whose work appears in Spadina Literary Review, Adelaide Literary, Scarlet Leaf Review, The Siren's Call, Literary Hatchet, Wellington Street Review, Aphelion, and elsewhere, including October Hill. And she's currently working on her third novel. You can read more about her at https://Ivanka, IVANKA, Fear, FEAR, .wix site, WIX site, SITE.com/my site. So Ivanka will read a poem for us entitled Once Upon a Time.
Thank you, Richard. Once upon a time. Once upon a time, I was happy, but didn't know it like I know now. Prince, princess, fairy godmother too, they all played their role in my story. Now I'm lost in a world of pretend, while reality reigns all around. Seems my kingdom has crumbled to dust. Don't know how this fairy tale will end. Once upon a time I was happy, but didn't know it like I know now. Days spent in the sunshine by the sea, waves carrying away my worries, glistening water and silky sand, the sound of laughter and merriment, wading, splashing, building sandcastles, paradise unleashed at my command. Once upon a time I was happy, but didn't know it like I know now. Strolls through gardens with a gentle breeze, with colors so vibrant and cheery, paths through royal hues dappled with gold, the feeling of peace and contentment. Gazing, admiring, smelling roses, a fairyland for me to behold. Once upon a time, I was happy, but didn't know it like I know now. Jaunts by emerald lakes with air so crisp, majestic mountains guarding proudly. Wilderness unspoiled and nature pure, the sense of calm and contemplation. Smiling, wondering, capturing moments, my domain I surveyed with rapture. Once upon a time I was happy, but didn't know it like I know now. Travels to faraway lands in spring, the countryside ripe with purity. Quaint villages steeped in tradition, the views magical and enchanting. Exploring, visiting, sharing news, embracing each brand new dominion. Once upon a time I was happy, but didn't know it, like I know now. Treasure times in our castle, excuse me, our home, my crown jewels, those cherished memories. My white knight, our royal family, filled my soul with pure joy and deep pride. Living, loving, thankful for each day in this wonderland bestowed on me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ivanka, for taking us on this magical journey through fairyland. Your poem sounds very much almost like a fairy tale, but you bring us back to a reality, which is something different. Lovely work, lovingly written. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Beautiful work, and I think we'll have one more beautiful work, and that will come from Kersten Christianson. Kersten is up in Alaska, I believe. Is that correct, Kersten?
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so welcome, Kersten. Kersten briefly is a raven-watching, moon-gazing, high school English teaching Alaskan. She serves as poetry editor of the quarterly journal Alaskan Women Speak. Her latest collection of poetry, Curating the House of Nostalgia, will publish in 2020. I'm assuming it's later this month, Kersten?
It has actually published. It's
out. Congratulations then. The book is called Curating the House of Nostalgia, already published by Schillaci Editions. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So Kersten also holds an MFA from University of Alaska, and you can find her at www.kerstenchristianson.com. Kersten, you'll read for us a poem entitled Joy this evening?
I will. Mm-hmm.
We'll be pleased to listen. Thank you very much, Kersten.
Well, thank you to Richard and to Samantha for organizing this. I appreciate the opportunity to read. It's a stormy night here in Alaska, so if you hear bells, it's my wind chimes.
Okay. I was going to ask you about the weather, but I didn't want to jinx it, actually. But it's cold here in New York, but I have a feeling it's much colder and much more stormy up there this evening. But we're glad that you dialed in and joined us.
Thank you. Joy. At the border of morning, in the shoulder of dark and light, a shadow of a thrush stills on a snow-laden branch, while twinkle light and candlelight and stove light fet waltz into the kitchen, beckon morning to play while French roast brews. The dog greets the day in snowy frolic, and against the steam of coffee my pen wanders riotously, the line between winter and spring.
Well, that's great, Kersten. Thank you so much. You managed to say so much in a compact work. I can see the dog playing and the steam rising off the coffee. Thank you very much for taking us into that warm, enveloping moment. I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much for joining us and reading this evening, Kersten. So at this point, we're at the end of the readings, but we still have time for some questions. I loved all the poetry this evening. I thought the works were really special, and the short stories offered us something different. Each author brought a different story, a different perspective, a different narrative to the table this evening. So we'd like to open up the floor to any of our viewers, listeners who may have questions for our authors. I'm hoping and I believe our authors are still with us this evening. So if anyone would like to pose a question about the works you heard this evening, or about what the authors here have in the works for the future, what their plans are, feel free to ask. And Samantha, if you would like to moderate this session, we'd love to have you come forward and lend a hand here.
Sure, happy to do so. I hope everyone can hear me all right. I didn't receive any questions within the chat, but like Richard mentioned, there's a great time to ask any questions to either the authors or to the October Hill staff. It's just a good time for us to get to know each other a little bit better. So if you have something to ask, feel free to go for it. Dominic, I see that you took yourself off of mute. Do you have something you'd like to ask?
Yeah, what it was I was supposed to be nominated for this thing called a Pushcart Prize. What exactly is that?
Okay, so a Pushcart Prize, it comes around annually, and honestly, this is the first time that October Hill has nominated anybody for the Pushcart Prize.
Oh, really?
Yes, so this year, we've done a little bit more to support our authors. Yes, we've been so focused on building up the magazine and everything like that, but we've been able to do more this year. And so we've nominated a handful of authors for the Pushcart Prize. We've also nominated some people from the Pen Prize, which we've done for the second year now. Excuse me. The Pushcart Prize obviously happens annually, and you hear about it a few times with authors who submit work to us. And I'm sorry, but my brain is kind of blinking all of a sudden. It went downhill. You know how that happens? I apologize. Sorry. I really don't know where I went there. But yes, Dominic, you were one of our nominees for that this year.
Thank you. Thank you.
I apologize for that. I'll have more info for everyone here in just a moment.
Okay. Samantha, I actually would like to pose a question to the four poets, to Trevor Maynard, Kersten Christianson, Ivanka Fear, and Dominic Windram. You obviously, all of you have very great talents and very different styles of writing. And each of you has come to this evening and brought a different style of work to the evening. A couple of the works address directly the pandemic and the experience of the pandemic in the past year. But the question I've always had for writers, authors of poetry is, and maybe the four of you can shed light on this if you'd like. What inspires you to write these works? What drives you? What makes you want to pick up a pen and write about the figures, the statistics of the pandemic, or the experience of the pandemic, or in the case of Kersten and Ivanka, what inspired you to write your works? The two works we heard this evening, Once Upon a Time and Joy. I think that's always a question in readers' minds when they read a work. What was really going on in your mind when you decided to write this work and put the pen to paper, or to put the keys to the keyboard and to tap it out on the screen?
Well, I think in my case, it was basically just annoyance and anger, really, that all we kept hearing about was just figures. It's like entertainment. Mm-hmm. And I was just kind of annoyed at that. So that generally the reason I write things is because I just want to change things, want to change the world, want people to realise that things are serious and that you need to be shocked out of things.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Trevor. And I think maybe part of that comes from the 24/7 nonstop news style on television, where most people seem to get their news and information. 1 minute we're hearing a snippet about the latest death toll and figures, and the next minute they're moving on to a flood in the Gulf Coast of the U.S., which has absolutely nothing to do with it. And I think what your poem brings forth is that sense of maybe outrage, quiet outrage, that the humanity of people is being overlooked at a time when people are dying and suffering massively. So I can understand the origins of the poem. and certainly, I think it's important for everybody to understand what is really what is behind the poem. And the name is rather ironic because it addresses the death toll, but behind the figures are people and faces and families who are suffering and dying. So what about you, Dominic? What inspired you to write your work?
Well, listening to Trevor's, I thought it was a really interesting poem that Trevor wrote, and it does represent the anger. I just wanted to do it from a personal perspective when I wrote that poem, just the way I was feeling during the lockdown. I was starting to get bored, and I just wanted to bring nature into it, feelings about nature, and
Was it a sense of fatigue, perhaps?
Yes. I was getting a real sense of fatigue at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And so nature provided something of an antidote, perhaps.
Yes, definitely. I've wrote a lot about nature this year, funnily enough. Possibly because of the lockdown, because you tend to notice more things like that rather than if you're in busy schedules all the time. So I think that in England we have like lots of variety in the seasons, so it's worth writing about.
I see. Well, that's very interesting. So the writing provided something of a perhaps something of a refuge from
definitely.
Unrelenting gloom and the wearing nature of the pandemic and the numbers and the depressing nature of the statistics every day. So, and what about you, Ivanka? Can you tell us more about Once Upon a Time, the origins of the story?
Well, my inspiration comes mainly from everyday events, the smallest little thing, unexpectedly usually. This one, I remember the moment where I had the idea was actually at the beach. So the poem is about appreciating every little moment that you have in life. And so I remember that actual day when we were at the beach and, watching the waves and just enjoying the nice weather. And from that one idea came all the others when I thought of other things, other moments in my life that I enjoyed. And perhaps at the time, you appreciate those moments, but they always seem better when you're looking back on them. And so right now, with things going on the way they are in the world, I felt this was really something that we can all relate to, looking back at the times, the things that we've been able to do, the events we've participated in, that right now they look so great if we could only participate in those.
I see. So that really helps to put it into perspective. This is, in a sense, a poem looking backward at when times were better compared to now, and perhaps appreciating what we had before everything shut down.
Well, it is, and yet, ironically, it wasn't written at this time. It was written before the situation we're in, but it relates to any time that we're going through, especially the times right now. Yeah.
And I have a feeling that when I read it, and I read it several times, and I've listened to you read it a couple of times, that there's a sense of fragility almost, that all of the beautiful things in life can be taken away in one fell swoop by sort of the randomness or freakishness of nature or other events, by fate, perhaps.
Right, exactly.
So perhaps it would be wise of us to appreciate what we have, because it may be fleeting, as life itself may be fleeting. So very interesting work. Thank you for sharing it this evening. And I wanted to ask Kersten also about your work, Kersten. What inspired you to write Joy? Is it just sort of a feeling of appreciation of life after fresh snow and morning coffee, perhaps?
It is that, but it's so much more. I think I write poetry to capture a moment in time. My late husband was a photographer and a teacher, and I teach and I write. And so, you know, we would adventure into some pretty remote, lonely places north and, you know, as far east as we can go on the Trans-Canada Highway. And, you know, I was always trying to catch up in journals. I was an avid journaler for a long time, and found that poetry actually did a finer job of capturing a moment. And so I think I write from that place of just wanting to preserve, you know, that creative spark and whatever moment it is, looking at everything. So
yeah, when I read your work and listened to it a couple of times, I thought that the work was almost like a photograph, was almost like a snapshot of a morning experience, but in words rather than in film. And yet you paint with your words, you conjure up images with your words that are photographic. I can see the dog frolicking in the snow, and the snow, the steam rising off the coffee. So it's very visual, and yet your medium is words. So you know, it's almost like you're capturing that moment with a sort of a photographic image in your own work. So I could see the connection between your husband's work and yours.
mm-hmm.
So you have a book coming out, or it's already out. I just wanted to ask briefly, Curating the House of Nostalgia, is that a collection?
It is. Actually, I have it here. It is my second full-length collection, and I have a chapbook in between. So this is the newest one, Curating the House of Nostalgia. Okay,
great. Wonderful. And is that available online on Amazon?
It's on Amazon, and it's also available through the publisher Schillaci and my locally independently owned bookstore.
Okay, thank you very much. And Trevor, you also have a book coming out. Question for Trevor. You're having a book come out in 2021, correct, Trevor?
Yeah, I'm working on that at the moment. Yeah, I've been trying to get another collection out for about the last 5 years, but I've been sort of concentrating on publishing other people's stuff over that time period. And when the lockdown came out, I basically wanted to get everybody's reaction. I wanted a kind of historic document about the pandemic from a poetic point of view, hence the poems from the lockdown, and then the other issues of this year as well, which were covered in short story compilation. So,
well, good luck with that. We'll look forward to seeing that when it comes out, Trevor. So one question also for Robert. Robert, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, Robert, you also have a book coming out in 2021 from Iron Press. It's a poetry collection?
It is, yes.
Okay, have they given it a name yet?
No, actually.
Okay.
No, they haven't. I mean, I think it's still building. It was quite interesting. He's a guy that I met through a mutual friend, and we got talking about the fact that he runs a small press and has done for 40 odd years. And he came and actually stayed here. He was finishing off writing a play, and he stayed with me for a few days. I just left him alone to write. But as he was leaving, I said to him, I've got a question for you, which is probably the question you dread most. And he said, go on. And I said, would you have a look at some of my poetry? And he's like, yeah, I do dread that all the time. But he says also, yeah, very happy to. But he says, I won't act as a friend, I'll act as an editor, you know, which is fair enough. But I was very pleased. I got a very high strike rate with him, because he asked me for 20 poems and he accepted 16 as the initial tranche.
That's a good percentage, yeah.
It really is, because he said he's an extremely harsh critic. So I was quite pleased with that. So we're going through the next iteration of, like, what do we add to those ones now, really, you know?
Okay. Well, we'll wish you lots of luck with that, Robert, and we'll look forward to hearing more about it.
Thank you.
Samantha, do we have any other questions from our viewers, listeners this evening?
Not as far as what I've received in the chat. So if we still wanted to open up, that's fine by me, but I know that we're a little over our time, and we have some people in England who are quite late.
Okay.
I would just love to, can I just jump in and just show you, I did show you this on the run through, but I was just going to show you my prop. Is that okay?
Okay,
yeah,
sure.
This is, I can't see on my own camera for some reason, but can you all see that?
No, I think your camera is angled to the ceiling.
Was it?
I see your hand.
You see my hand? Okay, hold on. I can't. For some reason, I can't see my own camera. For some reason, this may not work. But if you can see that, no. Okay,
No.
we'll not worry about it. We'll not worry about it. It was the pin that was inside my leg in the story.
Oh wow!
Was the cape?
It looks like Beth Harris has a question for Kersten.
Hi, Kersten. Hi, everybody. Thank you for sharing your works of art tonight. I really appreciated hearing everybody's perspectives and voices, and seeing everybody's faces too, since it's been a long quarantine or lockdown, however you would like to say it. I had a question about Kersten, for you particularly. I was also struck by the language that you use that seemed to celebrate the natural world, and I am also a wildlife photographer predominantly, as well as a nature photographer. And I have written some poetry in the past, but I really struggle with just kind of getting started. And I was curious, and I think it was Ivanka, I think, who mentioned, I'm sorry if I got the name wrong, my apologies, the kind of observation of the smallest things. And so I do sit down to kind of think like that, and so on. So I'm just looking for guidance about how you get started. How do you choose your words? How do you figure out what it is you're going to write about, and what inspires you? Thank you.
Sure, that's a great question, because I think about the photography lessons that I learned from my husband, and he was always one. I mean, he had a very defined eye for subject, and I always think of that rule of three. In terms of photography, what are three layers I can add into my own writing? But I start with the language itself. And so my poetry will often begin with a list of language that is specific to whatever it is I want to write about. So today, for example, I was writing a poem for my writers group tonight about public radio pledging. And so I spent the afternoon just drafting a list of, support and pledge and, gift and, all these different words that were kind of rising to the surface in that process of trying to raise money for a nonprofit. And it became a pretty interesting writing process. From after I have the list written down, I can then apply the ideas to the poem. So that's usually how I begin.
I wanted to take a moment to introduce Beth to everyone who may not know who she is, but Beth has contributed work to October Hill magazine before. Her work is actually on the cover of our winter 2018 issue. She has another picture, I believe, on the inside as well, but thank you, Beth. That's such a stunning cover, quite honestly.
It is.
Yeah. Also, I wanted to step back a little bit. Robert, we can now see you. So did you want to share again? It looks like you're on mute. So if you wanted to share.
Yeah, I did something really stupid. For some reason, I was pressing a button and it was shooting out the back instead of the front. Anyway,
no worries.
This is the rod that was inside my thigh for 2 or 3 years. And quite beautifully mounted. I don't know if you can see that on an oak plinth, which my dad made, just as a way of displaying it. So it comes out of the hole, and that's the screw at the hip end. beautifully made, really beautifully made, all titanium. And I
we
asked them if
actually,
they would. I asked them if they could ask the surgeon if I could keep it afterwards, and he did clean it up. I didn't have to clean it up myself, which was good. Didn't want it all gristly and stuff. You know what I mean? That would have been horrible.
yeah. We did actually have a couple questions for you from Hussein, actually, our donor matcher. So he asked first, how much of your story is fiction and how much is nonfiction? And also, since the story was converted from a poem, how do you feel about the way that it turned out?
Oh, great questions. Thank you, Hussein. Well, first of all, I guess I should have mentioned right at the front that that it's all true. The only caveat to that is that it was quite a lot of it was a long time ago, so I may be slightly remembering things differently, but in my mind it's all true. And to be honest, I love the way it turned out. I wasn't at all fazed by the opportunity. I was quite pleased to have the opportunity. I would never have thought about doing it myself. But I worked with quite closely with Selin, who's on the call, in sort of honing it and getting it right. And I liked the fact that I was actually encouraged from the beginning to keep a lot of the poetic language that turned up in the poem. So a lot of the language that turned up there was maintained throughout the story. So. So yeah, I'm very pleased with it, very happy with it. Thank you.
Have you thought any more about making additional short stories? I know that you have a poetry collection, but have you thought about short stories?
I have. I had a long conversation with Selin about this actually by email, because my go-to for years and years and years was either a short story or an article. That's how I thought. And I would write poems sort of on the side and by the way. And what I've found in recent years is that poems kind of, I don't know, it's a bit like we were hearing just before about it's sort of more immediate and more connected somehow. So I tend to, my go-to now is poems. So it's quite an interesting possibility of switching back again towards short stories again for a while. And I have, yes, so the short answer is yes, I have. And I have looked at a couple of poems that I've got which could be turned into short stories. And I'm also looking at a couple of ideas that I've done nothing with, but which could be short stories. So yes, there is a possibility. And before you ask, I am definitely going to be submitting again to October Hill, because I love what you guys do.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, I was actually going to say that to everyone on the call, is that, if you want to submit work to us again, we'll definitely consider it, just like we do everyone else. So yeah. We know several of you have been frequent contributors to the magazine, and because of that, you've helped us build the foundation and really increase the awareness of the magazine for new authors. We've had, if I had to guess, we've had over 100 submissions so far for the winter issue. So good news, good time. Let me see here. I have not received any additional questions. Does anybody else have anything that they would like to ask, whether of the authors or our team? Okay. Well, if not, that's fine. If you have any questions, you can also always reach out to us at the email that's listed on your screen now. I'm not quite sure where those yellow lines came from, but just ignore those. But yeah, if you have any questions or comments, you can always reach out to us there or on social media. We usually respond pretty quickly. Richard, do you have any closing comments?
Yes, I just wanted to thank you, Samantha, for helping to organize this event, to thank Selin and Julia for reading in the stead of our two authors who could not be with us. And I want to give a great thanks to everyone, to all of our authors who read this evening, Dominic Windram, to Robert Best, and to Trevor, who all stayed up late to join us and share their works this evening, from the UK, and from Canada, Ivanka, And from Alaska, Kersten, thank you so much for joining us and making this program possible. We enjoyed all the works very much. And we also want to thank our audience for the folks who joined us and listened into the event. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll join us the next time we decide to do this. Thank you all very much.
And one more closing comment. To circle back to Hussein's matching donation, we will be doing that all the way up until December 31st. So you have from now until then. If you would communicate that to your friends, family, anybody who could help support us, that would really be wonderful. But thank you again for tonight. We do really appreciate everyone who is in attendance. Without you, this wouldn't have happened. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you, Samantha, and happy holidays and joy to all.
Indeed, to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good night.
Have a lovely evening. Good night.
I have to put that in, right?